I will go ahead and get started. So this is NRES 454, and you all have signed up for the online section. So that means probably, from what I can tell in the course, there's a lot of graduate students. This is a course that's going to follow along pretty closely with the regular NRES 54 in-person section, with some changes, of course, since we have sort of this online format. And so basically today we're kind of going to just get into a little bit about what this course is about, get into a little bit of brief information about GIS. There's going to be a bunch of opportunities right off the bat to just go ahead and get some participation points kind of knocked out, because I want to show you all kind of the course mechanics and the different things you'll be using through the course website. And then I'm going to do sort of an online, version of just looking at the GIS software. So let me go ahead and get some things set up here. And so, like I said, one thing we are going to do today is we are going to open ArcMap, and I'm going to have a very quick and easy kind of map that you're going to build. So I'm hoping most of you have ArcMap either installed already, or you figured out how to use the UI/UC Anywhere application, or you have some other setup maybe that works for you to be able to access ArcMap. If you don't have that today, it's not a huge deal. What we're going to be doing won't be due until next week, and that's how the weekly format's going to be in this course. But I just wanted to kind of give you that heads up that we will go ahead and jump into ArcMap here in a little bit towards the end of this first lecture. So let me first start. I want to talk a little bit about just my background and what this course is going to be about. So some of you, I actually maybe recognize your names, or maybe we've met before. But my name is Sam Stickley. I just finished my PhD at University of Illinois this past spring and deposited my dissertation over the summertime. So I just finished up. I helped instruct this course last fall when the regular instructor, Jennifer Fratterigo, was out on sabbatical. So I was teaching the in-person section of this last fall, and I've helped TA this course, I think, a total of 4 years before that. So I have a lot of experience specifically with this course. But I've also, been teaching other courses or working on other courses at VCU, where I did my master's degree. So I've been working with GIS data in general a long time. And so overall, like I said, I just finished my PhD at University of Illinois, got my master's at VCU, that's in Richmond, Virginia, and I did my bachelor's at Colorado State University. For Illinois, just to kind of give you an idea of the project I worked on for my dissertation, I just wanted to mention that a little bit. So what I basically, my main goal for my dissertation was to kind of look at prioritizing conservation efforts. So prioritizing spatially areas that might be of high conservation value. And so I used a lot of different GIS data. I also used sort of 3D data, which we'll talk a little bit about in this course, called LiDAR, light detection and ranging. And so I used that to develop sort of these vegetation structure characteristics in Great Smoky Mountains National Park. And then I was using those data sets to basically help predict microclimatic temperature. So using a whole bunch of different GIS data sets to predict very fine resolution microclimatic temperature across Great Smoky Mountains National Park. And then basically using those data to develop data sets of metabolic rate for these lungless or plethodontid salamanders in that region, as well as assessing like species distributions. So some of the graduate students out there might be doing projects similar to that, where you're sort of using a bunch of different data sets to estimate where species are likely to live or where suitable habitat would be. And then again, the main goal of my past research, at least at Illinois and partially at VCU too, has really been to use spatial data to develop conservation priorities. And so that I really just want to show you all that, because I want you to see a little bit of my background. especially for some of you that I might have met before, or maybe we bumped paths at University of Illinois. And just to show you that, I've used a wide array of GIS data, and I'm sure that a lot of you also will in this course, the grad students especially, will have a whole bunch of different types of projects that you're working on. I'm hoping at least that this course will be useful, one, for learning the concepts, okay, of course, for GIS. Two, really learning the software system that we'll be doing, which is with Esri, sort of the industry standard software. And then by the end of the course, really being able to kind of combine the concepts and your understanding of the software to hopefully organize spatial data properly and be able to develop, proper spatial research, maybe develop ideas of how to solve spatial problems. So that's really what this course is going to be about. And so the idea really, is that when we think about sort of understanding spatial data in general, there's one thing to understand about isolated facts, then there's another about really understanding how things are connected. And so when we work with GIS data, you're going to spend a lot of time developing organization skills on how to organize the spatial data. And that's important because then you'll be implementing the spatial data to hopefully solve some type of problem, and ideally for your own research, once you all are developing projects down the road. And so as far as the GIS concepts that we'll really be going through, there's a lot of different things we'll be covering, starting with sort of basic, definitions and different terms that we're working with. But for a lot of this course, we'll be working with data models, of course, and we'll talk about two different types mostly that we work with: vector data, which are called shapefiles in Esri, and raster data, which is more like grid data. So next week, we'll really get into the different types of data models that we're working with and start getting our hands on some of those data sets as well. We will spend a fair amount of time in the course talking about projections and coordinate systems. And I know for those of you that maybe have worked with GIS, I'm sure you've heard of these terms a little bit. Some of you probably have not. But we will spend a lot of time on that because it's really important to be able to understand what type of coordinate system that you need to be using for the research that you're doing. And as we'll learn, that can vary a lot depending on the type of region that you're at in the world, or depending on the project that you're doing. Of course, we'll talk a lot about sources of data. So we're going to be creating data in the course. We will be looking at areas where we can download data that's already available, then using those data sets with the GIS tools that are available to, ideally solve some type of spatial problem and develop some type of solution. And then, of course, we'll be talking about the modeling concepts a bit as well. Now, as far as the software, I hope everyone has, seen the announcements that I put out, but we will be using the Esri software, so ArcGIS. ArcGIS is definitely the industry standard. It's been around a long time. It's a very expensive and a very high quality GIS system. But just to give you an idea, back in 2003, Esri had about a third of the market share, and there were a handful of other types of software that either were specifically for GIS or had some type of GIS capability a little bit. Looking further into 2017, the big thing I would point out is this section here. So Esri, the ArcGIS products are still, a very heavy part of the market share, but there are a lot of open source free geospatial tools that you can access now. And we're not going to learn those tools in this course. I think that's something that's a little bit better in a more of an advanced course. But what I will say is what you take out of this course from the concepts that you learn and learning about the tools in the GIS system and how they work, if you understand those things well, switching from, say, Esri ArcMap over to a QGIS or GrassGIS, or if you're, been coding in a program like R, It's very easy to switch to those other types of programs if you end up having to do that down the road, because then it's all it's a matter of just learning that software. So I hope from this course, really what you pull from it is not learning how to use ArcMap. I want you to learn the concept so that you can use ArcMap well. But if you needed to use a different system down the road, ideally you'll get a lot out of this course to be able to do that as well. And then, like I said, the main goal of this is to be able to have spatial data, know how to get spatial data, work with it, know how to use ArcMap or some other type of GIS platform if you end up using that down the road. But basically being able to combine those things to develop your research projects and to be able to, solve some type of spatial problem. So that's kind of the main things that this course is going to be about. As far as the mechanics go, obviously everyone that's here knows we're meeting Tuesdays at 6:30. This is going to be, fully online, and we're going to basically be having lectures every Tuesday for a very short amount of time. But I will spend the majority probably just running through the weekly labs with you. So I'll come in and probably hit like the bigger points of the week that I think you need to understand. And you'll have video content on the website to watch outside of that. So lectures to watch outside of this Tuesday meeting time. And then we'll really jump into the weekly labs, and I'll pretty much get you started on the labs each week and then be here to help answer questions. So in the regular course, the one that's on campus in Champaign-Urbana, this course is set up to have basically a 3-hour lab period plus 2 lectures on Tuesday and Thursday. So that's one of the big differences with this online section, is that we kind of have to cram everything into this 3-hour period. And having worked in this class for a very long time, I know that students get a lot of benefit of having somebody there with them while they work on the labs, because as you run into issues or have something that comes up in the lab that's not quite working out, I think it'll benefit you the most to have me around to sort of work through those problems together. So my expectation is that we'll typically have about an hour of lecture material, maybe doing a few participation kind of grades in there, which you'll see some of those today, and then spending the rest of the time working on those labs. And so, as I mentioned, there's going to be basically the lecture videos that I'll have on the course website for you to watch. You won't have any this week until next week, where I post some new ones. But I will also post the recordings that I make for each Tuesday for those students that maybe had to miss a class. So just keep that in mind. I will have all of that available as well. And then, we'll be using that time really to, like I said, do a little bit of participation, but mostly lecture material, mostly trying to hit what we're doing in the lab with the ArcMap software. One thing I will say is for next week and the weeks after that, I will throw slides up ahead of time. So you'll have those at the beginning of the week. And I hope that you'll maybe try and at least skim through those a little bit before we meet as well. So we will have some other assignments and stuff too, and I want to talk about all that today and just kind of get that out of the way so everyone knows what they're working with this semester. We're going to have some required readings. Those are already up on the course website, and basically if you look in the schedule on the syllabus, you'll see the dates around when those readings will come up, and there'll be quizzes associated with those readings. Like I said, for participation in the class, I'm basically just going to have anonymous polling. And we'll talk a little bit about that. There'll be the weekly lab exercises. There'll be 2 homework assignments, and then there'll be a midterm and final, both an exam and a midterm and final practical. So we'll talk about that a little bit as well. Now, I've had a couple people reach out to me already about maybe scheduling issues. So if anybody has issues come up, ideally, if you can get to me, as far ahead of time in advance, that's great. Just send me an email, let me know if there's any problems with scheduling ahead of time, if you can. Obviously, as you all see, the course is going to be based on Compass 2G. Hopefully everyone's already accessed the course. I'm going to jump out of here and just kind of go to the course website for a minute and make sure everyone's kind of familiar with what's going on here. One resource that I do want to hopefully make sure everyone will go ahead and sign up for this week is the discussion board. So if you go into this discussion board and go ahead and hit this subscribe button, this is going to be important because this is a way to access questions for the entire class. So if you submit something on the discussion board, it's going to send an email to everybody in the class. So if you have a question that is maybe important for everyone in the class, go ahead and submit it on discussion board. I'll get an email. I'm pretty quick about trying to answer questions on this. Obviously, if you have some type of, private question or something like that, don't use this, just send me an email. But discussion boards worked really well in the past for not just me to help answer questions, but maybe your other classmates will help too, if I'm not too quick on the draw in answering something. So I hope everyone will go ahead and subscribe. I'll try and send an email about that to remind you as well. Let's go ahead and open up the schedule here. So hopefully everyone's accessed the syllabus and schedule. And I'm not going to read through all this, but I do just kind of want to pop down into the schedule a little bit and show a couple things here. Okay. So one of the things I just wanted to point out as far as the recommended and required readings, anything that you see in bold here with the star next to it is going to be a required reading for the week, and you're going to have a quiz based on that reading. So I'm going to open up a syllabus quiz, which I'll remind you at the end of class today that will be due next week. Okay. And that's basically just reading through the syllabus and then taking that quiz. Very simple. There'll be a few other readings, these required ones here. And then I'll talk in a minute about the recommended readings, about the book that I'm going to recommend but not require for everyone to get. But I do hope everyone will take note of some of the main dates, right? So there's some homework assignments that will come up, and we'll talk about that in a few weeks. Make sure you take note of when the midterm exam is going to be. That will be during the class period. We'll take the midterm exam as well as the midterm lab practical. So I'll talk about that a little bit more as well. The final exam, I don't have an exact date yet. University of Illinois typically sets an exact time and date that I have to schedule the exam at. So I'm kind of waiting to figure out when that's going to be, but I will update the syllabus as soon as I can on that. One other thing I do want to mention on here too, that I have put up on the website. So hopefully everyone knows the Zoom meeting links on here. Anytime you need to get onto a Zoom meeting on Tuesdays, that's set up and ready to go. The required readings for the whole semester are already up there if you feel like, getting on ahead of that. But those first readings won't be for another couple weeks. The participation link here is going to have the three main forms of participation, which I'll talk about in a minute. And then I have this GIS resources tab. If you go into this folder, there's a whole bunch of information in here. I'm not going to go through all of it now, but throughout the course, you might end up using some of these resources in here. One thing I know that some students mention, at least in the past, is that, this is a GIS course. It can be kind of technical. There's a lot of jargon. And I know that these glossaries and dictionaries help a little bit. As you're reading through lab or material and if you get a little bit overwhelmed with any of the technical jargon, obviously you can ask me, but you have these resources here as well to kind of look at. And so I do just want to mention this textbook. So in the schedule, you'll notice that I have recommended readings, and that is from this textbook, but it is not a requirement. So here's what I would say about this book. One, it's a really high quality GIS book, and it's not that expensive. I think you can find it used typically for about 25 bucks. I just bought a new one. It was $40. So it's strongly encouraged to have the book, especially for those of you that think you'll be using GIS later on. Again, not that expensive for a very high quality book, but none of the test material, okay, none of the quizzes, none of the questions that I ask will be based off specifically from that book. You will be able to look at the lectures, read the lecture slides, the things that we've learned in the lab, and the material in those lab directions each week. That is what your questions will be based off of. So I don't want to have anyone, purchase something that they don't have to. But again, highly encouraged if you think GIS is going to be something that's important for you or your work. This is a book you can have for a long time that will be good for that. And so I mentioned the software, at least hopefully everyone saw in the announcements and through the emails that I sent that we're using ArcGIS, or I might refer to that as ArcMap 10.8. I did want to ask, we'll talk about it later. Hopefully everyone's worked out how they're going to use the software. We have multiple options for that. I know that sometimes the computers won't work depending on the computer that you have. So I will, at least for anybody that's having issues with the software, I hope you'll reach out to me quick, because if you don't have it today, it's not going to be too big of a deal. You'll have this week to kind of get it set up and submit this first map we work on today. But by next week, when we really get into these weekly labs, you're going to have access to this. So again, if you are having problems, please email me, come contact me, let me know how I can help to make sure that you have the right software. And one thing I will mention, we're using 10.8. Some of the lab directions that we have will be based either on 10.7 or 10.8. The versions really didn't change enough to where the directions have changed anything at all. I will also mention that the UI/UC web store, where you're downloading the software, 10.9 might become available this semester. I would just say maybe hold off on downloading 10.9 because I don't know if the directions will work perfectly with it. The versions tend not to change very much. So the weekly lab directions, probably it won't matter if you get the new version, but I just want to say it's not necessary to download that. And I can't guarantee the lab directions will perfectly fit with it. If it does become available, I'll probably get it and look at the lab directions and see if it's worth downloading. But you all can just assume that 10.8 will be the version we work with throughout this whole semester. And then again, if you have trouble downloading anything, I have those instructions. Make sure everyone sees that as well on here. Please visit the ArcMap software help tab. I've got a tutorial about downloading and installing the software. I've got a tutorial about using UI/UC anywhere for those of you that maybe don't have a computer that's going to work well. So please use those resources. But again, if you do have issues, don't hesitate to contact me as well. And so I will just mention this. UI/UC Anywhere is a newer, basically, version of what we used to have, which was like a remote connect. And it's basically the same thing, but it's a way to log into and work on a machine in the ACES library at the University of Illinois. So if you end up ever having problems with your computer, or the software is running slow on your computer, or a lot of times people with MacBooks that have issues working with ArcGIS, this will be a good resource for you. Hopefully most people don't need to use it, but just in case. And as well with that, if you end up having questions, please go to the help spot on the website and watch that video. It might not be a bad idea for everyone to take a look at that, just in case you end up having to use it one week, but that video is on there, and please let me know if you need any more help figuring out how to work with the software as well. So the participation grade, I kind of mentioned this up front, that I'm not going to have a lot of participation in the course where I'm calling on students or asking you all to jump on Zoom necessarily. That might happen here or there, just to maybe ask a question and hopefully people will answer. But most of the participation grades are going to come from either the quizzes, the weekly quizzes that we have, and I think there's 5 total throughout the semester, so 1 every couple weeks. Each week we'll probably have at least 1 in-class participation poll, and we will have 3 semester surveys. So the polls and the surveys are going to be kind of questions, either, at least for the surveys will be questions kind of based on your background at the beginning, how the class is going in the middle, and how it ended. And I use that information just to see as we go along if there's something that I need to be working on, and then at the end of the course if there's something I need to work on later down the road. But I also have these in-class polls. These are also anonymous, and we'll open one of those up here in just a little bit. Those are going to kind of be questions about the material that we're covering. And again, I'm using that as information to help me kind of gauge where everybody's at. So if there's some type of area where people aren't answering the questions that I throw out there, right, it gives me a good idea of something that I need to work on in the class to kind of bring that topic back up. I mentioned the required readings. There's going to be 5 required readings this semester and a quiz that accompanies those readings. The first quiz is going to be based on the syllabus. It's due next Tuesday. It's only a couple questions. I will open that up at the end of class. So I'll remind everybody about that in just a little bit. And then, of course, one of the main aspects of this class is going to be these weekly lab exercises. And this is going to be where you really start to learn how to use the ArcMap software, really start to understand the tools and how these different types of data work together. This is something that some weeks you will probably finish the lab exercises in the maybe 2-hour period that we work on them together. A lot of times you won't, because we have a little bit of limited time in this online section. There'll be a lot of times where maybe you have another hour or 2 that you need to work on these assignments. And so the weekly lab exercises, we'll work on them on Tuesdays. They will not be due until the following Tuesday at 6 p.m. So most of these things I'll try and have, submitted right before our class time the following week. For these weekly lab exercises, and we'll go through an example of one today, you kind of have to think about how you want to store data. So most of us are going to be using our personal computers from home since it's an online course. If you are in a lab, you might want to think about using a USB drive. But for the most part, you all will just be able to store data on your personal computer. You'll be able to back data up on a cloud storage website. And so in the video that I put on about UIUC Anywhere, I do talk about using Box, Illinois Box, which is a free data storage account. So that's a really good one to use if you don't have one already. But a lot of you might have Google Drive that you use, or Dropbox or something along those lines. So I recommend having that available, only because you might want to back up all of the data that you work on throughout the semester. If you only save it to your computer and something happens to your computer, that could be a little bit problematic down the road. So always be trying to back data up somewhere. Again, the assignments will be due the following week, so you'll have basically an entire week to work on them. Everything will be submitted on Compass. And I will just mention that there's 10 labs total, there's 11 labs total, but you can drop one lab grade. So if you end up having an issue with one of the labs, you were unable to get to it that week, you just didn't have time and you submitted something where you don't do great on that lab, I'll go ahead and drop one of those grades. So just keep that in mind as well. So I'll mention this too. The fast facts file I've found helpful over the years. This is something that we've been doing since I've been teaching this course or helping to teach this course. And I think this is important for especially those of you that maybe will have a little bit of issues learning a new software. Basically, any way that you want to keep notes about the GIS software, about the weekly labs that we're working through, go ahead and take those notes down, digital notes, however you want to do it, and just update those each week. So in other words, if you're having problems finding a tool, or maybe the concept of how the tool works, something along those lines, make a note of that, keep that in what I'll call a fast facts file. And this will basically be like a cheat sheet. It's something that you can use during lab practicals. So when you have sort of a practical down the road and you're working with the software and trying to solve some type of question or problem that I give for those practicals, this will be an easy way for you to hopefully access quickly some of those notes that you took down to be able to help you with the software. And I'll be reminding you about all these things each week as well. So hopefully I'll be able to tell you maybe some things that you want to keep in mind for the notes that you're taking. We will also have 2 homework assignments. I'll talk about those more down the road. The homework assignments, I hope, for those of you that are either trying to figure out a project or have a project already, I hope that you'll be able to use the maps for the work that you're doing. So you'll basically in the first project be developing a map, and then in the second one, just doing a very small report and analysis in some type of study area. So again, ideally, you'll be able to work with a project or area that you think you'll have in your own research or for your own capstone project. But if it's not, you'll just be able to kind of pick and choose a different area for each of these. And we won't actually have these for another few weeks, so I'll go into quite a bit more detail once those pop up. And then, like I mentioned, we will have 1 midterm exam in practical and then 1 final exam in practical. So again, please note the dates of those on your calendars. Those are classes that I need to make sure everybody is at so that you can do them during those days. If you have any issues, with scheduling, don't hesitate to reach out to me about that. So one question I usually get right off the bat is, how are the exams set up? The exams will be pretty straightforward in the sense that they'll mostly be multiple choice, true, false, a little bit of short answer and matching. We'll do that during the class period. The practicals, like I said, that's a time to hopefully demonstrate, what you've learned with the software and demonstrate, the tools that we've been working with through each weekly lab. And so the weekly labs build off each other, as you might imagine. Starts out very simple, trying to learn the ArcMap system, how to get to different icons, and then builds up over the course of the semester into really developing your skills in solving spatial problems with multiple data sets. So as we go along, just kind of be thinking about the notes you want to take during the labs and how that might help you during the lab practicals. And again, we'll talk more about these practicals down the road as we get closer. So hopefully everyone's checked out the grading, but I did just want to show this real quick. As you'll see, the labs are a big part of this grade. Okay, they're worth 20 points each. So we do have 10 labs total with 1 dropped grade. So almost 30% of the grade are the labs. Okay. And when you combine the labs with the homework assignments and the participation, you really start to build up a large percentage of the grade in this course. And I mention that because for those of you that spend the time on the labs and the homework and make sure that everything's turned in on time, I can pretty much guarantee you'll do very well in this course. The exams and the practicals can be a little tough, but if you build up, taking the time to work on those weekly labs, it doesn't just enhance your grade in the sense that you're doing well in the labs, but it really helps you learn the material well, and you end up doing better on the midterm and the final. So I can't press that enough. The biggest issues I've had in past years are when students are missing the lab exercises or turning them in late, not getting them done all the way. If you take your time to work on those labs, take your time to work on those assignments, I guarantee you will have success in this course. So just kind of keep that in mind. I won't talk much about this. We've got a lot of grad students in here, and I've never had too many issues at Illinois. Obviously, I'm going to do my best to try and create a good atmosphere for everyone. I'm not the type of instructor that's going to just like pick out a name and call on you and try and, ask a question out of nowhere. I hope that you all will respond. If I have questions, please answer me over Zoom, jump in anytime that you want to, throw an answer out on chat, however you prefer to do that. But as long as you're respecting each other, respecting me, we shouldn't have any problems there. Like I mentioned, we will have some of the in-class polling. We'll have the surveys that are part of this class. That's going to be information for me to get feedback from you all. So that's one way to give feedback. But I also hope that if you ever have any issues or, again, accommodations for something, or you have problems with the schedule, or you're a little bit behind on something, you can always reach out to me. There's not a time that I'm not going to, respond and try and work with you to make sure everyone's getting through the class with no problems or minimal problems. So keep that in mind. Don't hesitate to contact me. And then, I kind of just mentioned this, but the biggest thing I would say again is just come to me if you're having issues, because I will take the time to help out and make sure you're learning this material. Obviously, I expect that people will join every Tuesday. I know we all have times where, we might have to miss a class here or there. That's understandable, but just try and keep on top of everything as you go along. And again, I don't think you'll have too many issues as long as you're doing that. Like I mentioned, the fast facts file, I talked about the homework assignments. This is all in the syllabus. Talked about the final and midterm. Again, for the final exam, I'll try and have a date for that as soon as I can get one out to everybody. The grading, I will mention this again. If you haven't seen this, please take a look in the syllabus. Okay. And hopefully you'll see, the percentages and get an idea of where all those points are at. But like I mentioned here, the lab exercises are a big portion of that grade. So I hope everyone will take their time on working with those exercises. Okay, so the other slides weren't too big of a deal. I think that's the main stuff that I wanted to look at as far as, getting the course mechanics, the structure, that kind of stuff out of the way. Do you all have any questions about any of that, the assignments that we're going to be working on, any of the structure or the way that the course is set up at all? Obviously, as we work along, I'll be reminding you of a lot of these things. We'll talk about the different assignments as they come up. But if anybody has questions, just let me know. For those of you that have not taken any GIS courses, this will just be some basic information. This is really a way to organize, collect, and sort of manage spatial data. And basically these types of systems, these computer systems that we'll be working with, like Esri, are basically providing a way to do that. So it's providing a way to take information about spatial objects, entities, you might hear me talk about, and basically display that information on the screen, allow us to analyze those data in some way, and ideally develop some type of output. When we talk about an output, a lot of the time what I'm talking about is a map, right? Some type of, display of the data we're working with. But there's a lot of other things, of course, that GIS can do. So we can develop spatially, statistical information and get outputs like that as well. So there's a lot of that type of information that we will get into this semester. Now, the majority of what you'll learn this semester is a lot of that upfront part, how to organize, collect, work with the data, a little bit towards the end of the semester about how to kind of piece things together and analyze data, and a lot of developing these mapped outputs. So each week we'll have a different mapped output that you work on. And so, hopefully what you get from that is mostly what you're learning from GIS, or mostly what you're working with are data that tell you, one, a location, right? We want to know where something is and what it is. And so there's really endless amounts of different types of data sets that are available right now. There are, different types of data that you can create. And so you'll spend time in the labs this semester as well, creating some of your own data. You'll spend time downloading other data and learning how to work with data sets that other people have produced. But all of those data have the same thing in common. There's going to be information about location and information stored at that location about an entity or an object or something there. And so this isn't too important, but you'll mostly hear me talk about GIS in the term of GIS systems. So referring to, the software and hardware that we're working with, GPS to develop data, software to work with spatial data. So that's kind of GIS in the term of GIS systems. But of course, there's a science to this as well, too. So you might hear GIS referred to in other ways in readings about the actual science of the study of GIS. I won't jump into these links, but if you're interested in learning about some of those different types of fields of study in GIS, some of these links would be helpful here. And again, I'll post these lecture slides to the course website probably right after class tonight. So just a brief history is a map in 1854 developed by John Snow. Not this one that you all are probably thinking of, but this old guy right here, Dr. John Snow. And he used basically a map like this that you will see if you type in his name. This was a hand-drawn map, and he had basically some survey data that I think him and somebody else worked on to get, that was basically allowed him to look at a map of locations in London and recognize a pattern for the sources of the outbreak of cholera. So he did this basically just, again, by hand drawing maps, marking in data, and sort of using that to just kind of see the spatial issue that was going on. And that pointed into areas in London that pointed to basically the source of cholera outbreak, which were these wells where people were visiting. And so the highly populated areas where people were visiting those wells. It was not GIS, of course, at that point. This is really more of somebody that's well known for his mapping and for epidemiology. But it wasn't really until, well, I will show you this. 1 year after, if you end up ever looking into this person, who it's a pretty interesting story, you'll see this map a lot. But if you dig a little further, the following year, he produced a really more advanced map and fixed a bunch of the mistakes from his initial survey. And this is a map you don't see as often, but if you do ever end up reading about him, I recommend taking a look at this map a little bit. It's real interesting. But really, it wasn't until like the 1960s where we basically Roger Tomlinson out of Canada started doing what we would consider GIS. That was sort of the start of GIS, if you will. And that had to do with working with some land inventory projects up in Canada. And then really, from the 60s, 70s, and 80s, there were advancements, of course. There were a lot more aerial imagery available. We started getting satellite data in the 80s that helped, push this type of field of study as well. And really in the 90s and early 2000s is when we started getting software applications and people started actually using this. The public was getting access to GIS data. Universities and researchers were starting to use it quite a bit more. And of course, after the 2000s up until now, we have just tons and tons of sources of GIS data. There are, like I mentioned before, Esri is just one of many different softwares that are out there now. For those of you that will be using this later on, I definitely would tell you to look into other GIS options as well, just to kind of get to know them a little bit, like QGIS or GRASS GIS, or using R coding and using GIS. But there is just so many sources of data, and so many sources now of different types of publicly available and open access software that's getting better and better and better too. So a lot of advancements in GIS over the last 20, 30 years. And again, we've talked about this a little bit, but the main aspect of this is we're using geospatial information to understand some type of problem or develop research or understand a research issue. A lot of times it's to communicate a message or find some type of solution to an issue. And to give you just some examples of that, we pop into these links here. We've all seen, these maps now with the COVID-19 pandemic. And all of this is spatial data, right? So when you go in to look at any of these types of links, this is New York Times links here. We have information about an area. In this case, we're looking at country. Within that defined, polygon, as we'll call it, and you'll get used to that term. But in each of these are basically just a shape with some type of locational information tied to it. And within that information, there is data stored about, in this case, COVID and the outbreaks or trends that are happening with COVID. Look at another example here. If we look at the Illinois Department of Public Health, we can look a little bit closer. This map will load here. And so again, you can kind of see that same idea. We just have basic information, right? One, spatial location, different counties here in Illinois that we'll be looking at, all polygons in this case. And we'll talk a lot about points, lines, and polygons next week. And within those polygons, there is information stored behind the scenes in what we call an attribute table. Within that table, there might be information about one, giving sort of a unique ID to each of these different shapes. Maybe a name about county in this example, information in this case about COVID-19, the number of cases. And you can just really store tons and tons and tons of different pieces of information into those attribute tables that are tied to this spatial information. And again, we'll spend a lot of time talking about that next week and looking at this vector type of data format. Just another example here, again, we're trying to, these are examples of using GIS to try and give some information about data out there. I'm not going to jump onto this website, but for those of you that might be interested, there's a link on these lecture slides that you can get into. And this is a really, really great link because it's kind of showing a constant update of the fires that are going on. And we all know that that's been a recurring and a big problem that's getting worse and worse and worse, it seems, every year. But again, same idea. We just have, in this case, point data. And if you go to this website and click on any of the points on the current date, you will get information. This is all spatial data tied to that point location. So this is from last year, from exactly about a year ago. And at this point location up in Humboldt County, California, there was information about a very large fire, almost 20,000 acres that had been burned. It was increasing from the day before. Information about the county, the amount that's contained, the date of containment, or last time of containment, and just, again, lots and lots and lots of different information that can be stored with these data sets. Now, the other thing to kind of think about is, and next week we'll talk about this a lot, these are data models. They're representations of what's going on. And the other aspect is kind of thinking about using things like satellite data or aerial imagery. That's another way for us to get information, right, about Earth and convert that into some type of data model that we work with. So kind of keeping in line with the fires here, this is just a true color image of the fire that was taking place in one of the fires up in Humboldt County or somewhere up in that area. Not sure which fire this was. Here's another image of that, kind of looking at a false color. So again, this is information directly taken from a satellite, but we can use that information, right? A satellite image or some other type of 3D imagery like LiDAR data or aerial photography. And we can convert those data sets into GIS systems to then conduct analyses on them in some type of data model format. And again, the idea here is to be able to display information. Here we're looking at fire hazard severity zones. So this is information. This is a much older map from 2007, but it's displaying information that might be pertinent to people. Another example of that would just be sort of an evacuation kind of map. So what I want everyone to kind of do is just look at this map for a little bit and just kind of think about, one, what are the data being displayed? What is the message trying to be communicated? And then try and think about this from the other side. If you were developing this map, and not from a GIS perspective, but just from the perspective of how you wanted to communicate information, what are some of the issues that you think you might run into in creating this map? So take just maybe a minute to think about that. Again, what's being displayed here? Anything that you think is important that's being displayed here? What's trying to be communicated? And then from the other side, what might be hard if you're making this map? What might cause issues with creating that map? So think about that for a minute, and then maybe just throw a few answers into chat here in a little bit, if you would. So I'll give you maybe a minute to take a look at this map. Hopefully everyone can see it all right. It might be a little bit small on your computers, but again, this is an evacuation map up in Mendocino County from 2018 here. And so maybe for those of you that are kind of thinking about this, just throw out a couple answers. What are just some of the basic pieces of information that you need here? So I see Hunter saying you might want information about population density, wind direction, jurisdictional response, vegetative cover. So Hunter's talking about all things maybe that the person on the other side creating this map needs to know in order to develop these types of evacuation information. And that's exactly right. So, I mean, you can think about somebody that's designing a project like this and having to get evacuation information out. That's exactly some of the information you would need to know. What else is there? What's being communicated here? First of all, that should be pretty straightforward. Yeah, so Ginny says mandatory areas. So this would be like areas that are evacuations, that are mandatory evacuations. That's exactly right. And the zones that would be maybe advised for evacuation compared to the ones that have to be evacuated. Exactly. So yeah, so again, thinking about that, it makes sense that we would need certain types of data in order to do this. From the basic standpoint, we need data just about like cities, right? Roads, things like that. And I see Sam's talking about the map a little bit. I think it could be streamlined a little bit. I definitely agree. This is actually a good example of a map that maybe has almost too much information in it. It's almost a little hard to read. So I agree. That's a really good point. And as you work on these maps across this semester, you'll really start to get a feel of trying to limit data so that you don't have too much on there, that it's too crazy. And also trying to make sure that what you're trying to get out is expressed correctly. So I think that's a really good point, that this map's a little bit, there's almost too much going on. But the main thing that I would at least take away from this is that you have to have certain types of information, different types of layers. And from the other side, for the person creating the map, like Sam mentioned, maybe they did way too much and put too much on here, but they have to think about other things too, like scale. Maybe how close in do you want to display data? How far out do you want to display this data? Again, the types of inputs that were first mentioned that need to go into developing these criteria. So hopefully what you take away from that, at least, is that there's a lot of things to think about when you're trying to produce a map. There's a lot of different types of data sets you might have to work with to be able to display information to maybe it's other scientists sometimes, maybe it's to the public like this one. But yeah, I think you all kind of get the point on that. So I'll go ahead and jump here. Next slide. So I actually just want to watch a quick video if I can set this up correctly, because I found these the other day and I think they're worth watching. Make sure I can share this correctly. Share sound. There we go. So this is a pretty quick video, I think maybe 4 minutes, but this will maybe give you an idea of some stuff Jane Goodall is doing with it. Everyone probably knows who she is and everybody loves her.
The astronauts also turned their cameras toward...
Can you all hear that on your end? I just want to make sure you can hear the sound.
Oh, I remember.
Can you all hear that?
For those first.
Yes.
Okay,
Yes,
thank
I
you.
can.
All right, this will just be about 4 minutes. I'll be right back.
Pictures of the little blue and green planet from outer space.
much more brightness than the moonshine we've seen.
It was almost science fiction. Almost, I could hardly believe it. And now things that I've seen looking at satellite images, seeing the extent of deforestation. We, the most intellectual species, are destroying our planet. As ecosystems are destroyed, plant species, animal species will disappear. These are shocking things, but it should wake us up. We should be very, very alert now. Gombe is the smallest national park in Tanzania. When I began in 1960, Gombe was part of the equatorial forest belt that went all across to West Africa. By 1990, it was a tiny island of forest surrounded by completely bare hills. That's when it actually hit me. If we don't do something to help the people find ways of living that don't destroy the environment, we can't even try to save the chimpanzees. It was in 1994 that the Jane Goodall Institute began its Takari program. This idea of working with the people was sort of new. I mean, others were handing out bits of money and jobs and stuff, but this was working with the people. We talked about the terrible erosion on the hills where they'd removed the trees, but they removed the trees not really through ignorance, but through desperation to grow more food. They wanted fertility for the overused farmland, which we managed to do without any chemicals. We were providing people with jobs, helping us to observe the chimpanzees. Once the villagers had come to trust us, they began to understand that preserving the forest, the environment, was just as important for their own future as for preserving wildlife. They got together all the data that they have decided is important, whether it's an illegally cut tree or whether it's the sighting of a chimp nest. The volunteer monitors all record the same things. They enter into the smartphone all the data, plug in, and upload it. GIS has really changed the way that I can see into the future. It gives us a whole new tool for understanding the environment that we cannot see from down on the ground. That information becomes available to JGI, to the village leaders, as part of a picture of what's going on around the globe. Indomitable human spirit, the resilience of nature, the energy and commitment of youth, this incredible intellect. Those are my reasons for hope. If we get together now, it's not too late. We can solve the problems. We can, we must, we will.
So this is actually a video series I just found that Esri, the software that we're working with, kind of partnered with National Geographic. And I'll show some of these videos over the next couple of weeks because I think they're really good. But the main point of showing that was just that, you know, the applications of GIS are pretty limitless. There's just so much stuff you can do with it. In this course, you know, I'll be talking a lot about you know, ecology and environmental sort of related GIS, but some of the labs look at other things too. And I hope that those of you that are maybe in other fields, if you have other topics you want me to try and cover too, I'm happy in the demonstrations that I do with you all to try and show some other data types as well. But I see Jenny mentioned that the Chicago Field Museum has a great display of her work. I'm sure everyone here is well familiar with her, and she's definitely one of my favorites. So that's another reason I wanted to show that video. But as you can see, like what she was talking about, she's been doing this for decades, right? And now all of a sudden, with the advancements of GIS, she's starting to get tons and tons of more information than she ever had before. From people just collecting data from their smartphones. And so I think it's really important just to think about all the different types of applications that really can be done with this kind of stuff. So one thing I want to do before we jump into ArcMap is I want to have everyone jump into Compass, if you can go ahead and do that. And I want to open up a couple of the participation things that you'll be doing this week. So for right now, if you go on Compass to the participation tab, I'm going to open up this participation poll. These will be the kind of polls that I'll have during class. This is literally 4 questions, very simple. It's more just an example to kind of get you used to working with this. So I'll go ahead and open that up. Go ahead and take this first participation poll. It should only take maybe 5 minutes or something. And again, these will be just a couple points each class period when we're in class answering questions. I will also, and I'll remind you of this here in just a little bit, but I will also open up our first quiz, which is going to be the syllabus quiz. That's also literally just a few questions to kind of get you used to the quizzes and make sure you've read the syllabus. That'll be due next week. So I'll open that up at the end of class. We also have one introduction survey that'll be due this week, or sorry, next week on Tuesday. So I'll open that up at the end of class. But just go ahead, if you would, log into Compass and go ahead and take this participation poll. All right, so hopefully everyone's had some time to answer the again, very brief questions on that. I just wanted to get everyone kind of used to taking those participation polls. As we go along throughout the semester, we'll probably stop during some of the lecture material and just have some kind of basic questions about things we've covered throughout the class so far. Just a reminder, these are totally anonymous. It's basically just to have you all participating in class, getting some questions answered so that I can look at the data at the end and kind of see if there's maybe information, as we go along in the semester that I'm not covering well enough. So we'll have those pretty much every Tuesday. They'll be part of your participation grade. I will talk about and open up these other participation parts for this week in a little bit, but I'll leave this open in case anyone's still working on it. And what I want to do now is basically go through the process of sort of storing and moving some data around and opening up ArcMap. And we're basically going to make a very easy, simple map this first time here today. For those of you, I think maybe one or two of you did not have your software set up, or you're using UI UC anywhere, and you have maybe not used that very much yet. I'll have you all kind of wait, just watch if you will, kind of stick around for the rest of this class period. I'm going to be posting this video or some other type of video tutorial to show how to make this map again, and you will have this entire week. So for those of you that don't have the software yet, or if you're using UI UC anywhere and you're not comfortable with that, I think I'll just wait so that we can have you watch the tutorial videos to work your way through this. For those of you that are on your computers and you're ready to maybe start working with the ArcMap software, the first thing that I want to talk about is just basically managing data. And so each week when we come into lab, I'm going to have data that's stored in the lab exercises and worksheets area. And so there will be things like the lab data that we're working with, the lab directions, the worksheets that you might be filling out to answer questions on each week. So go ahead into this folder, and you should see another folder for the lab introduction data for week 1. Go ahead and click on that. And once you get to this, go ahead and click on this link. And this is going to download a zip file full of the lab data. So go ahead and click on that, and you should see that downloading here in the corner. Now, it might take a minute or two, depending on the computer you're working with. This is not a big data set. And if I'm going too fast or you all need time, please just let me know. The other aspect is we now just want to save this zip folder to our computer. And so for me, what I'm going to be doing is working off of my C drive on my computer. I might have a different drive sometimes that I work on, but I'm just going to navigate to the C drive to where I want to store data. And in this case, I've got a folder set up for the InRes class, and I'm going to have a folder within that set up for each lab. I'm going to go ahead and set that up into an introductory lab. And so once you have a space, whether you're saving this on your own personal computer or saving this. A lot of times people use like a USB drive or some other type of drive that you might have set up connected to your computer. Whatever the case is, go ahead and we will save this zip folder onto the space that we want to be working in. And so some of you might not have worked with zip folders before. Each week, the data will be stored in a zip folder to save space. Very simple, save it to the area that you're working with. You'll right click on it, and we're just going to extract all of that data. So I'll hold that up there just for a second and see if everyone can kind of make sure everyone's keeping up with me here. Again, if you're falling behind or just need a little bit more time or something explained again, don't hesitate to jump on Zoom or send me a chat message. But again, once we have that data, I'm going to go ahead and right click and extract all. And I'm just going to save that right into the intro lab folder and hit extract. And so once I have that, I don't need the zip folder anymore. It's up to you whether you want to do this, but I'm just going to go ahead and delete the zip folder out. So I have this one folder that I'm working with. And inside of this lab intro data, there's going to be multiple files in here. And we're going to talk about that in just a second. But while you all are still working through that, if you're getting those data downloaded, let's also go ahead and start getting ArcMap up. And ArcMap can take a few minutes to open up. So for me, I like to just go in and search for it. I'll just type in ArcMap here. ArcMap 10.8.1. We'll go ahead and open that up. You can also find it, of course, through the Windows area here in your computer if you need to. So we'll give that just a few minutes here to go ahead and open up. Is anybody having any problems so far getting ArcMap up or getting the data set up on their computer? Like everyone's doing okay.
I'm still having an issue with extracting
for the data or for opening ArcMap?
For the data.
For the data. Okay, is it a problem with uploading to your file or?
I'm not sure what's going on.
Okay. Well, let's just hold off on that for a second. See if you can download it again. Try it one more time or two. Again, if you can't make it work this time, not a big deal. This is going to be a real simple process that we're going through today. And I'll have this video posted throughout the week. We'll have some extra time after class. So maybe when I finish up going through this tutorial, I'll meet with you a little bit. We'll see if we can figure out what's going on with the data set for you. Okay. So for the rest of you, if you have the data set up and hopefully ArcMap's kind of getting opened up here, for this first screen that pops up, I'll just go ahead and be hitting cancel for now. You don't necessarily need this screen. It gives you options to open up a blank map or whatever. But if you just hit cancel, you're already open in a blank map here. And for a lot of you, your screen might look like this with no information here. You might have this table of contents here. Two main things that you're really going to be working with, okay? The table of contents. If you don't have that, you can find that right up here with this little icon. And this is going to be where the data sets that we're working with are being displayed temporarily so that we can use them in the GIS system. The other main thing you're going to be working with is the catalog at first. So if you don't see that up on this side, you can open up catalog. Sometimes these windows will just pop up kind of like this so that you can move them around anywhere you want to. One thing I'll mention is it's very easy to dock them. So instead of moving it around, I tend to like to just move it over, and you'll see these little blue icons here when you move it. If you just put your pointer right to that blue icon, it'll dock that into the side for you and just stay up there. You also have options to kind of like pin it so that it stays there permanently, or to unpin it so that it kind of goes away if you're not using it. I tend to just pin it down and have these two main things we're working with. I like to go ahead and just have them set up here. And so there's a couple things that I'm going to talk about. One, I want to just look at the data before we open it in ArcMap. Okay, the data sets that we're going to be working with today are just two shapefile data sets. And we're going to spend a lot of time next week talking about vector data, which are basically called shape files through Esri. They're sometimes called different things in other GIS programs, but you'll hear that term a lot here, shape files. And shape files, as you can see from the names of this, what we're going to view in ArcMap today are just a shape file of lakes and a shape file of roads. But what I want to point out is that a shape file is actually a bunch of different files pieced together to represent a data model of one thing. And so I'll come back to that in just a minute. But first, let's go ahead and get the data connected. So for all of you out there, you should have a location where you've set the data up. The first thing you'll do when you come into, getting ready for lab each week, you'll download the data, have it on your files somewhere, wherever you're storing all of your data for the class. And then you're going to be connecting that data out of this catalog. So there's this little folder with a plus button, the connect to folder. Go ahead and hit that. So again, this will be kind of a weekly thing. I'll remind you of this a bunch of times the first couple of weeks, but we'll always be connecting to the folder. And then once you click on that connect to folder, you just go ahead and go to the location where you saved everything. So for me, I saved my data set on the PC on the C drive. And I saved it in this folder and then another folder. So you all will just have to navigate to where you store the data. Navigate into labs here, and then this intro lab. And it should be this lab intro data. So once you've navigated, down to the folder where you've saved everything, just highlight that the data folder and go ahead and hit OK. And what you should notice automatically is that ArcMap is going to set you up to show you where that folder is in the catalog here. And once that pops up, you can hit this little plus sign next to it. And then what you should see are just two files, one for lakes and one for roads. So I'll wait just a minute here and make sure everybody's kind of caught up and following along. Anybody has problems?
What was the very first button that you pushed?
So for connecting to the folder, you can hit this connect to folder button here.
Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, and so the connect to folder, basically, then you just kind of navigate to that to find it. You can see I have a bunch of different things connected here from different drives I've been using or locations I want to use. This is part of data organization. It's a little sloppy actually for me to have all that many up, but you'll kind of get used to doing that, connecting to this folder. Ideally, you'll have all your data stored in the same folder each week, so you'll get very comfortable with organizing that data into subfolders and locating these data sets each week and connecting the folder. And so what I will say for those of you that have this up, if you want to go ahead and add this data, there's two different ways really to do that. One of them is there's this add data button. This can be a really good way to add data. If you have a lot of different data sets, you can click on that. Again, you'll have to get used to doing this, but you're always going to be navigating to that space. So in this case, if I go to folder connections, I navigate to the intro data. You have an option here to select one or hold down Control or Shift and select both and add those data sets in. The way that I tend to add data, if I don't have a lot of it, is a lot simpler. You can literally just highlight it from catalog and just hold down and drop it in. And so what you'll see popping up here are the roads, and then I'll just go ahead and drop this lake data set in there too. And we've got lakes. And if you're using a mouse, you can kind of scroll in or scroll out, and you kind of see the differences that change here as you're doing that. But as you all are adding that data in, I just want to point out what we see here in the ArcMap system are two files. We see a roads file and we see a lakes file. These are just models representing lakes and roads. But if you were to look at the data that we saved right, in our folders, the actual data set behind the scenes, we see a whole bunch of different files. And so this is really the structure of the data using multiple different files to produce this one thing that we see in a GIS system. And what these different files do, some of them are required. You have to have, for instance, a .shp. You have to have a .shx and a .dbf. I'm not going to expect you all to necessarily remember that right off the bat. We'll talk about this a lot, but those three files are mandatory. You have to have that to create a shape file. But there's also other pieces of information, and we'll spend a lot of time this semester talking about projections and this PRJ file. That is information that is giving you the type of coordinate system or projection that's used with the data set. So that's a really important file. You don't have to have it right off the bat, but it's a really important one that you'll see we end up really having to have down the road with any files that we work with. But all these files basically are different pieces that are creating these data sets, right? So for instance, the DBF file, if you see that, or sometimes the SHX, these are files that actually have information stored in them, like attribute data. And then again, like I said, the PRJ file being one that has information about the actual spatial information behind the scenes. So for now, the main point I just want to make for that is these data models that we see in ArcMap are produced by a lot of different files behind the scenes, right? And so just make sure that's clear. The other thing I want to point out about that too is when you save data into these files, it's really important not to, change the data in here in any way. So I don't delete any files, try not to open these files unless it's something that are specific in the directions that we give you, because any type of changes that you make here, that alters the data that'll be used in the GIS system. Now, to that point, I want to make another point too. And again, I know this is a lot of information, but you'll slowly start to get this information over and over again the next few weeks. Two important aspects to think about between the table of contents and the catalog. The catalog is the data connected to your folder. Okay, so don't follow along with me on this, but if you were to right-click that data and delete it, that will permanently delete the data from your folder, okay? Because this is showing the data that are connected to the folder. So it's another thing to just kind of keep in mind is for data in the catalog, if you change that data, and we'll be working with data out of this a lot, altering it, making changes to it, you just have to be very careful not to delete it or to do a change that you don't want to take place, because then you kind of have to go back in, re-download the data and work with it again. Now, on the other hand, once we've added data into the GIS system here, these files in the table of contents are temporary. These are the files that are displaying the data. I can remove this data. I can do anything with that data and pop it back in. No big deal at all. It's not deleting the files on your folder at all, but the catalog is. So just make sure to kind of keep that in mind as well. So one other thing I think I'll mention since we have time today is this too. When we work with GIS files, you'll be working with a lot of different layers, and we call these thematic layers. So in this case, one layer is roads in this example, the other layer is lakes. In these GIS systems, because they're different layers, they basically get stacked, right? So sometimes you'll see in the first couple labs as you start to work with this that you have to move these data sets around to view something below them. So I just wanted to point that out now. But that's something we'll really get into a little bit more down the road. So let me ask this before I move on to some of these kind of final steps of creating a map. Does everybody have this up that's working with the software tonight? Everyone's got the lakes and roads up. Okay, looks like most people are giving thumbs up there. So the last thing I kind of want to look at is there's two different views to kind of work with data sets in ArcMap. This is called the data view. If you go up here to view, you'll see that we are in data view. The other option is to switch over to the layout view. So I'm going to do that right now. And you can switch from data view to layout view down here as well. There's sort of a data view and a layout view. And as you might imagine, kind of looking at this, there's sort of two different aspects to this. When you're working with data sets or maybe running a tool on a data set or calculating some type of spatial statistic, you're pretty much always going to be in data view. Data view allows you to move things around, scroll. You'll notice as well when you do that we have changes in the spatial data down here as well, right? So we can move things, scroll things around. And next week, you'll really start to work with a lot of those tools and zooming in on information, zooming out of information, panning around. There's this little globe right here. If you move around, it'll get you right back to everything in the main screen here. So we'll be working with that a lot next week in the first lab. But the big thing I want to make sure you remember from today is that we can switch over to this layout view. And this gives us the option to now produce an output, right? A mapped output. And so for this first assignment this week, this is just for a few points for a participation grade this week. It's not part of the first lab at all. But what I want you all to do is basically kind of follow along with me and create this map. And so there's a couple things to kind of think about. One is, how you might want the map positioned. So just like thinking about a printer, right? This is a page behind it. One thing we might want to do, and it's up to you how you want to do this, but you might want to go to page and print setup, just like if you were going to a printer, and change this to the landscape view. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. We'll click landscape. I'm going to scroll out just a little bit. And so another thing you might notice is that, we sort of have this frame. We can kind of move this around a little bit if we want to. What that frame is representing, everything within this box here, within this box that's currently highlighted, is what's being shown in the data view. Okay, so that might be a little complicated at first, and you'll get the hang of that as we work with this data set more. But one thing I would want to do is right click. So you'll get used to that in ArcMap. If you click in the middle, a left click, and see that that's highlighted, and then right click and go to properties. I'm just going to go to the frame. It might pop up automatically. You might have to kind of navigate over to it. And I'm just going to remove that border. If I go to this drop down arrow and scroll up, I'm going to hit none and then hit OK. And so you'll still see that there when you highlight this, but it won't show up in your final mapped product. So I'm going to do that one more time for those of you that are kind of working out there. If nothing's highlighted, just click one time in the middle and then right click. You're going to be working with that a lot. There's a whole bunch of different things that you might be doing in here, especially in properties. And then again, once you get into the properties, I'm just going to change the border to none. And so one of the other things I want to mention about this is, as you work with these data sets, you might notice that, okay, this is not actually taking up necessarily the entire part of the page, right? So you can imagine this is basically the PDF back here, or the document that we're going to be creating. Maybe we want to make this map just a little bit bigger. There's two ways to do that. Or there's probably more than two ways, but the easiest way is you can jump back into data view and you can actually just zoom in a little bit. I'll zoom in a bunch just to make the point here. If you go back to layout view, you can see that the scale has changed a ton. Now, the other option is actually just to change the map scale up here. So you can see that right now the map is at a 1 to 16,833 scale. I'm going to play around with that a little bit. Let's see what a 20,000 scale does. I'm just going to type in 20,000. You can see that shrinks it down just a little bit. How about 100,000? Okay, now it's too small. So that's an easy way to kind of play around with this too. Kind of figure out what your scale needs to be. Try 40,000. Let's try 50,000. That's a pretty good scale, I think, for this first map. So I'm going to kind of keep that, maybe position that where I want it. And then I'm just going to ask you all to add a couple things into this first map. So before we do that, let me just make sure. Looks like everyone's following along pretty well. Nobody seems to have any issues. Check chat real quick. Okay, good. Seems like everyone's following along. So last couple steps for this first map that we're going to create. If you go to this insert tab, we have a whole bunch of options. We can insert things like a north arrow. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. And you can kind of pick out whichever arrow you like here. I'll go with this one. So again, if you go to insert, and this is the north arrow, you'll see that it popped up right here. You can kind of drag that wherever you want to. You can make it larger, kind of make this real big, real small, whatever you want to do with that. I am also going to go back up to insert, and let's throw in a scale bar. So this will always be important, making sure that a scale bar is in there. And there are a bunch of different options. You can kind of choose what you want. I tend to go with something like this, maybe for this one. There's ways to adjust the scale through the properties. Before I do that, maybe I'll just do it in the, I'll go ahead and add it in and just show you that whenever you add these tools in, you can kind of drag and drop. You can also always adjust properties by right clicking and going to properties. So for instance, this scale bar, and you'll notice if I keep making it larger, it changes, right? Because we have spatial information tied to this data. As you adjust the scale bar, it's adjusting for the spatial information that we have about the data set. So I might do something like 4 miles. I probably, for most of my scale bars that I create, I would probably go into properties and make some changes there. Maybe I want to change it to kilometers, would make more sense. You can even say, instead of writing out kilometers, I'll just label it KM there. You can change the number of divisions. I'll try 2 and 2. You all don't have to do any of this. I just want to see that you can get a scale bar in there. But as you work this semester, you'll start to get used to kind of making some of these adjustments. And I'll go ahead and hit OK. So you can see that's automatically updated here to kilometers. And let me change that a little bit. Yeah, I'll do something like 4 kilometers. So let's get a north arrow. We'll get a scale bar in there. Let's go ahead and insert a legend, just so you kind of get used to that. So again, going up to insert, we'll hit legend. And you can see here, we just have the 2 objects that we want to throw in there. So I'll go ahead and hit next. And next. You all don't need to mess around with any of these too much unless you want to. Maybe you want to put a border around the legend, or maybe we don't want the legend title to show that. I'll erase that. You can just kind of hit next through all these and hit finish. And then you'll see we got a nice little legend that pops up here. So you might need to move a few things around, maybe increase the size of some of these things. And then I just want to have you add one last thing in. We'll just add maybe well, you can add in a title if you want to. That'll automatically just kind of give you an option to insert a title. So maybe we just do week 1 intro lab. You can kind of move that around. Again, just like all of these different things, when you click on them and highlight them, it's very easy just to go into the properties and sort of change different things about it. So maybe you want to change the size of this. You can go into change symbol here and just increase the size. Try maybe 28. And then I'll just go ahead and have you also insert some text information. So we'll insert a little text box. That can be kind of hard to see sometimes. You see right here that it actually is like right in the center. Scroll in. So if it's hard to find that, you might have to scroll in there and then just sort of drag that over to the side. And again, I'll just go ahead and adjust. If you right click and go to those properties, we'll go ahead and change that symbol. I think I'll make that maybe like an 18. And if you go back into the properties, you can basically just type whatever you want in here. The main thing I just want to see is maybe like a name and date, something like that. Whatever other information you want to put in. But these elements, and the reason I wanted to show that is basically each week for lab, that's what we're going to essentially ask you to, at a minimum, make sure you have. We always want to have a scale bar. We pretty much always want to have some type of legend explaining the data, some type of title that's going to be explaining what the project was that week, your name, your date, maybe your username or something like that on there. And of course, a north arrow and any other information as you get more comfortable with this that you want to work with, you can do that as well. And so before I show how to do the PDF, the last thing I'll kind of mention, and we get into this in a lot more detail in the labs that are coming up, but you're welcome to change colors or do anything you want. For instance, with the lakes, if you right click in the table of contents on any of these and go into the properties, you have options to change the symbology. You can also just double click right on that little thing, and maybe you want to change that to a blue or some other color. This will give you an option to kind of change that around. You can see when I change that, it automatically updates on the legend. So anytime you're sort of manipulating or changing these things, that kind of stuff will automatically be updated if you have a legend already put in there. For roads, maybe I want to just double click on that and maybe do this red one, the highway, something along those lines. Go back into the properties here and edit this a little bit. Position this around. So again, this is going to be just one of the first assignments we have from lab. And this is just for participation points. It's not part of the weekly lab grades. Those will start next week. But once you have all of this set up, it doesn't have to look perfect. I'm just trying to make sure you at least see how to kind of get going with ArcMap here. The last step that I want to do is just have everybody see how to save this as a PDF. And so once you're comfortable with the map you have, you think it's ready to go, we can just go up here to File and Export Map. So I'll hold that up there just for a minute and let everyone kind of catch up and get to that point. So again, up in File, Export Map, I'm going to go ahead and click on that. Take a minute to pop up. And so when this comes up, just like saving a Word document or anything else, you're going to have a whole bunch of options. It'll give you options about changing the resolution. For those of you that, might end up creating projects for journal articles that you're submitting to or presentations, and you want to make sure that the resolution's really high, you might want to up the DPI here. That's kind of extraneous information, but something to keep in mind. And then, you have a lot of different options for what you want to save it as. You want to save it as an image. Do you want to save it as a certain type of like a TIFF or a PNG? In the case for this course, I'm going to ask that you always save it as a PDF. So let's go ahead and make sure that's switched to PDF there. And just to make sure, is there anybody that needs me to go back through that one more time, or is everybody kind of caught up here? Seems like you're following along pretty well. Okay. So we're going to save it as a PDF. The other thing I'm going to ask you to do when you submit any maps is just to first type in your username. So mine's Stickley2, and then just some type of title that describes what the map is. So I'll say week 1 intro map. So one thing you'll notice is with GIS systems in general, a lot of times it's not good to have spaces in between characters. So you'll notice that I a lot of the times use underscores, or you can just not have any underscores but not use spaces, which is kind of something to keep in mind. And then of course, we're going to save this as a PDF, but the other thing is you always have to navigate to save it to the right spot. Okay. So in my case, I'm going to go up here and navigate back into the C drive all the way to the folder that I want to save this in. So I'll go to my C drive and get into my InRes folder here. And I'm just going to save that right into my intro lab folder and go ahead and let that go through. So I'll give everyone just a minute here to kind of catch up on that. Is there anybody that has ArcMap up right now that has not been able to follow along or wants me to jump back to any of the previous directions? So it seems like probably most people have been keeping along with this. Once we have this PDF, I'm just going to show everyone how to submit it on Compass, and then that's really going to be it for today. So for those of you that maybe are still trying to figure out how to use Anywhere, or if you have questions after this class, just stay on the line here for a little bit. But for the rest of you, if you have the PDF set up and it's saved in your folder, maybe open it up to take a look, make sure everything looks all right. But you should end up with basically a nice PDF of the map that you just created. And then you can just jump over into Compass 2G. Again, to the lab exercises and worksheets. I have a tab where you can submit your lab exercises. You'll just go right into that folder. And then you can click on this lab introduction map for week 1. And then you'll just go ahead and browse to the folder and submit that PDF document. And so once you get that done, hopefully a lot of you have gone ahead and finished that map. Again, this won't be due until next Tuesday. It's likely that we'll have maybe a couple more people that join the class, or we have some people that are working out some software issues. So you'll have the remainder of this week to go ahead and submit this. Again, I'll post this video or some other type of tutorial going over this type of information. So if you weren't able to create the map today, just know that I'll have that up hopefully tomorrow so that you can follow along. But everybody will ideally get that submitted this week to get those participation points. Oh, that's a good question, actually, from Megan. I did forget to mention this. That's an important aspect of this too, for those of you that are still on the line. We'll talk about this again next week. But yes, we just saved a PDF document, but we always also want to save, just like you would save a Word document as you go around, we want to save what's called an MXD. And just like a Word document, Excel, any of these other programs you've used, you'll simply just go ahead and save as and navigate to that same folder if you want to. I would save it in the same folder that I have the exact data in. So I would go into this lab intro data folder, and you just type this, whatever you want to title it, call it week 1 intro. That is going to save basically in your folder an MXD document. Okay, so the MXD document, like I mentioned, is basically just like when you save a Word document. Okay, if you have ArcMap closed and sort of saving as you go along and close this out, once that MXD is saved, if you are to open ArcMap again, it's going to open up and directly come back to where you left off with ArcMap. So that's going to be a really important aspect each week to continue saving these documents. And again, we'll be going over a lot of this in the week 1 lab as well. But it's always important to save that MXD document as well. How about any other questions while everyone's on the line? So Deborah asked about using the 5th edition of the textbook instead of the 6th. That's definitely fine with me if you have access to the 5th edition. The schedule and the syllabus, I know they've made some changes to the textbook as far as which chapters for what. So if you do use one of the older editions, I definitely encourage that. If you have access to that instead of the 6th one, that's fine. But just keep in mind that the chapters that I recommend to read on the schedule might be different. So you might want to look at the chapters from the 6th edition online and just kind of compare and contrast which ones you should be reading, or just reach out to me if you have questions during that week on which chapter you should be looking at. But yeah, definitely, if you have access to the 5th edition, that's definitely fine. You might be able to find that one for a lot cheaper online as well. They're very similar as far as what's in them. It's just that the formatting and the way that they're set up might be slightly different. About any other questions before everyone jumps off here? That should be it for this week. We'll end early. Like I said, I'll send an email about the assignments for this week. Very simple, shouldn't take more than 20-30 minutes to complete all of the participation points this week. And next week when we meet up, we'll really start to delve into kind of that intro material, the different data models that we're going to be working with, jumping into our first weekly lab. So, it's nice to meet all of you. I appreciate you kind of giving me some information on your background. And, throughout this week, you end up having more questions. As always, I'm always available. So don't hesitate to reach out to me and let me know if you need something. But other than that, thanks to those of you that are sticking around. And for the rest of you, I will see you next week. So have a good night.